space and futuristic cities. Energy in abundance. The end of poverty and war. Instead, prosperity and peace. That is the vision of Atlantropa. It was Munich architect Herman Sorgel's lifelong dream. He wanted to change the face of our planet and bring Europe and Africa together. It was a dream, but one that brought hope and fascination to the world for decades. Germany after the First World War, a time of unemployment and political unrest. It is also the time of bohemianism, optimism, and inspiration. Intellectuals and idealists seeking to improve the world, such as Herman Sorgel, are flourishing.
Sorgel belonged to the scene in Schwabing, in Munich, not so much to the actual bohemians, but more to the intellectuals. One of them had said that it was usual for such intellectuals to have a new idea to save the world every Thursday, and to publicize it, or to make oneself interesting with it. And Herman Sorgel did just that.
In the early 20s, Munich is a stronghold for free thinkers. Herman Sorgel is no different. He is absolutely convinced of himself and his big idea. He is also charismatic and puts people under his spell. Sorgel looks for sponsors and colleagues for his Atlantropa project. His adventurous plan: he wants to build a wall across the Gibraltar Straits and separate the Mediterranean from the Atlantic with a gigantic dam. Without a connection to the Atlantic, the water level of the Mediterranean can be lowered. If that happened, Sorgel believed that more than 500,000 square kilometers of new land would be won back from the sea, an area the size of France and Belgium put together. In addition, he planned to seal off all of the rivers flowing into the Mediterranean, also with huge dams. That way, Europe and Africa's energy problems would be solved. Sorgel believes that the water in the dams can be used to generate 110,000 megawatts of electricity. He also envisions a bridge span stretching over the Mediterranean from Sicily to Africa. Sorgel's visions know no boundaries. Without water, the old harbor cities would lay inland, and new cities would be built along the new coastline. Sorgel is convinced that his mammoth project would unite the neighboring countries. He calculated that the completion of his dream would take 150 years, which would also be 150 years' work for generations of people. Eventually, the Mediterranean's water level will have sunk 650 feet. Europe and Africa will become one new continent, Atlantropa. With his utopian vision, Herman Sorgel promises solutions for all of the major problems of his time. It should become a nation of peace, a living space with energy in abundance.
Sorgel was the son of a high official in Bavaria. but he must have seemed quite aristocratic, and he was quite charming. We know the photos. He wore a monocle. He must have been quite self-confident. He was a man with his finger on the pulse, who was closely tied to the reform movement.
Herman Sorgel is born on April 2nd, 1885, in Regensburg, in eastern Bavaria. He becomes interested in water power at an early age, as his father, Dr. Hans Knight of Sorgel, is the head of the Royal Bavarian Building Authority and in charge of hydraulic engineering. In recognition of his outstanding work, Sorgel Sr. is ennobled. His son Herman follows him into this specialized area. Sorgel Sr. also heads the planning of the Walchensee power station near Munich, a piece of pioneering technical achievement. It was completed in 1924 and used the difference in height of two lakes to generate energy. It is the largest storage power plant in the German Reich and is still one of the largest of its kind in Germany today. Herman Sorgel is thrilled by the power station's groundbreaking technology. It inspires him to build something even bigger. In 1925, Herman Sorgel moves to Munich and meets his future wife, Irena, who is from a well-to-do family. He also sets up a magazine, Baukunst, the art of building. The young publisher is successful. His magazine quickly becomes the most important publication in the German architecture scene, making him financially independent. That year, in order to research for an article, he travels to the United States on board the Berlin.
His journey to America gives him a strong impulse to get involved in new things. One of them is his discovery of the skyscraper city. He is completely fascinated by what the American planners are doing and by their endless optimism. It led him to say this: the Americans may not have any culture, but for that, we don't have any civilization. He believed the two had to be brought together. That was the future.
His experience in America only increases Sorgel's pessimism about the old world. He sees Europe in danger and fears war and catastrophic hunger.
Sorgel was a utopian. He was absolutely convinced that everything depended on his plan, that it would save not only Europe, but the whole world.
Herman Sorgel works intensively on his ideas and starts publishing them. From the separate proposals, he slowly begins to form a unifying plan. His clear goal is a better world. It looks like this. A large power grid should span the Mediterranean. New land and energy provide an economic boom and freedom. Europe and Africa become Atlantropa.
The Atlantropa project contained with wonderful clarity and complexity all of the elements which define pure technocratic thinking. It was a gigantic project spanning continents, and it attempted to use technology to solve political, economic, cultural, and social problems all at once.
The plans are gigantic and without precedence, but in professional circles, they were considered completely realistic. Building technology had made great strides, and the experts believed that it would go even further.
What made the typical engineer around 1910 stand out was that he was a pioneer. He had to anticipate a lot about physics, which had at that point not been discovered yet.
Sorgel believes in the theory that the Mediterranean was once dry land. prior to being flooded by the Atlantic at the end of the last ice age. And that is exactly what he wishes to achieve again. In order for Sorgel's dream to come true, his plan must wrangle the natural powers of the Straits of Gibraltar. The Atlantropa plan has become popular, and his followers are increasingly made up of renowned experts. The most important is the Swiss engineer Bruno Ziegwart. In 1929, they travel to Gibraltar and take extensive measurements.
Sorgel planned to take down an entire mountain range in Spain, which would have destroyed the town of Tarifa. The boulder would have been transported by ship to the right point and then lowered into the water. That way, a suitably wide and stable dam would have grown out of the water by itself.
Ziegwart and Sorgel calculate that the best starting position for the Gibraltar Dam is not at the strait's narrowest point, but at its shallowest, 12 miles further west. The curved dam should span 22 miles, from Spain to Morocco. The building plans of the Gibraltar Dam's dimensions far exceed all previous ones. The undersea foundations are 1.5 miles wide and over 1,000 feet high. An extraordinary building project. Up to 1 million workers are required. Sorgel and his engineers calculate that it will take 10 years to build. Once it is operational, the Gibraltar Power Station will be the largest in the world, producing 50,000 megawatts.
I think that the power station as a side canal plant would in principle have been feasible, even though the proportions would have been far greater than anything seen at the time. It would have been possible given the level of knowledge available then. The Francis turbines they would have needed, with a height of 100 meters, did also exist, but not quite in the dimensions they would have needed.
The Itaipu Embankment Dam on the Paraná, the border river between Brazil and Paraguay, is the largest hydroelectric power station in the world. It was completed in 1991. After 16 years of construction, it created a reservoir covering 540 square miles. However, Sorgel's Gibraltar Dam would not have to hold back a river, but an ocean.
One can hardly overestimate the aggressive corrosive damage that seawater causes. It is a serious problem which requires complex material solutions. One has to work with rust-free steel. That is one point. It would have been possible as rust-free steel had existed since about 1912, but I doubt the amounts available would have been sufficient for such a gigantic project.
The Itaipu Dam is 5 miles long. Gibraltar's would be 17 miles longer. It took nearly 3 years to build a canal to redirect the Paraná so that the actual building works could even begin.
When we look at other projects, for example, the Three Gorges Dam in China, 20,000 people worked there over 17 years on a dam which has a volume of around 40 million cubic meters. With the Atlantropa project, we are talking about between 2 and 5 billion cubic meters. When we add that up, we are looking at around 1 million workers. These million workers would be working a 3 or 4 shift system, which means that every morning and to every shift change, 250,000 workers would have to be transported from their camps to the building site. That in itself is a logistical problem, which would not be easy to solve.
Sorgel openly invites criticism of his Atlantropa plan. He alters his plans to incorporate new discoveries several times. For him and his supporters, the fundamental mission is beyond all question. Sorgel describes it in an article this way: epoch-making large-scale enterprises make the engineer a world planner, a liberator of humanity. Genoa, the birthplace of Christopher Columbus, one of the most important seaports on the Mediterranean. In Sorgel's plans, Genoa would have been completely reshaped and modernized, creating a fully modern and more functional seaport. With the lowering of the sea level, Genoa and all of the other Mediterranean harbor towns would dry up. The port would become a lake. New Genoa would be built on the newly reclaimed land. A technocratically planned town of gigantic proportions, 6 times the size of its predecessor. In the center of the new town, a mighty forum 2 miles long, allowing a view from the old town to the now distant open sea. The old Genoa would be part of the back country. In the early 30s, Atlantropa catches the attention of the international press.
Herman Sorgel of Munich has recently published a number of suggestions that were shocking on account of
L'intero mare Adriatico sparirete, tutte le nostre coste subirebbero un cambiamento radicale. Le conseguenze per
Wir kennen eine Reihe von Kritiken, vor allen Dingen aus Italien.
We know of many critics, mostly from Italy. The Italians would have been badly affected. All of their coasts would have changed, although it must be said that they would have gained new land. There was a newspaper headline in Italy, Atlantropa, a bizarre German dream. And they said that this odd Mr. Sorgel should redesign Hamburg and Bremen, and not Genoa and Venice.
Sorgel goes to great lengths to appease his critics from the Mediterranean.
He had something special planned for Venice. Venice, a unique cultural monument and an important tourist destination. It was clear that Venice had to remain as it was.
It is clear to Sorgel that a Venice without canals would never be acceptable. A new city on the coast could never work for Venice. The results of the lowered sea level would nowhere be so dramatic as on the flat Adriatic. Instead of water, there would simply be a desert of salt.
Non credo che ci sia, che non va visto come un attacco.
I don't think that it should be seen as an attack on the soul of the Italian people, but rather one on their material interests. The plans don't take circumstances into consideration, ignoring the very nature of this place. Venice was built as a coastal town. That is where its value lies, its past and its life. It is a coastal town, and it could never be an inland town. The majority of Italians live on the coast. To Atlantropa, their environment would be completely turned on its head.
In the new world of Atlantropa, Venice would lie 280 miles from the coast, For Sorgel's Italian contemporaries, this is an unbearable idea. But Sorgel has a solution for this as well. He suggests keeping Venice as a cultural monument. The town and its system of lagoons would be preserved, and a reservoir would replace the Adriatic Sea. The dam would be built 20 miles from the town so that it would not be visible from Venice. The result would be an open-air museum with the illusion of a sea in the middle of the mainland. He plans a building. An Atlantropa headquarters whose stature should convey the promise of the new great continent. He asks the respected architect Fritz Höger for plans. Höger has designed a glazed Congress Hall flanked by 3 skyscrapers. They represent the connection between politics, economics, and technology. The headquarters should be built in Geneva, from where it will send its message of understanding between nations, unity and peace throughout the world. 1933. The Nazis take power. Their goal is anything but peaceful.
Es sind zwei verschiedene Kulturen des Think Big.
There were 2 different versions of Think Big with Herman Sorgel and Adolf Hitler. It does stand out that both of them came from the Munich scene, and that both of them had a history of rejection. Sorgel failed to obtain a doctor's degree, and Hitler was not accepted at the Art Academy. Perhaps we would have been spared fascism had that not happened. Both designed extraordinary geopolitical projects, which were enriched by architectural fantasy. Both understood that they needed to sell the idea to a large audience, but that is where the similarities end.
Sorgel war kein Nationalsozialist.
Sorgel was not a Nazi. He had a different set of values, which did not fit in well with Nazis. He had tried to use their terminology to get along with them, but to no avail, because their goals were too different.
Die Krise, die seit 1933 für das Projekt
Sorgel tried to overcome the crisis which had hampered the project since 1933 by presenting political concessions to the governments of Central Europe. His idea was for the Third Reich, in alliance with fascist Italy, to form an axis from Berlin to Rome, which would stretch down to the southern tip of Africa. And Atlantropa would be a fascist peace project. Of course, that did not work.
In 1936, the propaganda ministry commissions the Munich film studios Bavaria to make a half-hour film about Atlantropa. The film has one single goal: to make public how unfounded and dangerous Sorgel's plans are.
Meine Herren, Exzellenzen, das gewaltige Projekt der Mittelmeerabsenkung und Sahara-Bewässerung ist zu bestechend, als dass man an seiner Berechtigung Kritik üben dürfte. Aber an eines haben seine Urheber wohl zu wenig gedacht, nämlich, was sagt die Erde dazu? 13 Staaten sind direkt am Mittelmeer interessiert. Unter allen Staaten Europas und Nordafrikas soll das gewonnene Neuland verteilt werden. Wem aber gehört das Neuland in Wahrheit? Doch demjenigen, der Gewalt hat über den Damm, welcher die Wassermassen des Atlantik in drohender Höhe zurückhält. Kann das nicht zu Konflikten führen? Stellen Sie sich einmal Neapel vor, das anstatt seines berühmten Golfes nach der Absenkung einen breiten Gürtel unfruchtbaren Neulandes vor sich hat. Glauben Sie etwa, die Bewohner dieser ehemaligen Küstenstriche könnten sich einfach umstellen? Werden sich nicht alle diejenigen, denen unter der Ära des Meeres ein erträgliches Auskommen geblüht hat, auflehnen gegen diesen Damm, der mit brutaler Gewalt in das Leben der Völker eingegriffen hat? Denn Sprengstoffe an passender Stelle in diesem so leicht verwundbaren Damm angebracht und die Folgen, die das Projekt haben könnte.
The film proves popular with audiences, and Atlantropa is discredited.
Meine Damen und Herren, die Sitzung ist vertagt. Wir brechen die Übertragung ab und senden Schallplatten.
Hi, I'm David Orrick. You up next.
Nazi Germany had left the League of Nations in 1933. The international cooperation of the Atlantropa community becomes more difficult. Sorgel loses his foreign contacts. In 1937, Sorgel publicly warns of the danger of war and strongly criticizes the Nazi armament plans. He does not have to wait long for a response. Sorgel is visited by the Gestapo and told to stop making demands for his project. He sees himself, and more so his wife, in great danger. Irena Sorgel is half Jewish. The well-to-do art dealer also supports her husband's plans financially. Despite all threats, Sorgel pushes on publicly with his vision. In 1938, he publishes a book, The Three Great A's: America, Asia, and Atlantropa. Then, after war breaks out, the Nazi regime blocks all activities by his newly founded Atlantropa Institute. In 1943, the propaganda ministry bans Sorgel from publishing completely and threatens him with prison.
Sorgel was disappointed and frustrated. In 1943, he wrote in a letter, "I have been running around in circles for 10 years. He had, but he was unstoppable. As with the few possibilities available to him, and with the little political maneuvering room he had, since he was under surveillance, he always carried on."
Sorgel and his wife leave for the mountain town of Oberstdorf, avoiding the bombing raids on Munich. For the people in the countryside, the now 58-year-old is quite a noticeable figure. He is still remembered today.
A nobleman with a monocle and a camel hair overcoat. His appearance would make people say, "There's that Professor Sorgel."
I can still remember it very well. He always said that the world's population would grow so much that the whole of Africa, or a large part of it, would have to be cultivated, and that he wanted to pump the water out of the Mediterranean with desalination plants and whatnot, and close off Gibraltar with a dam.
His plan was discussed in Oberstdorf. Naturally, we were stunned.
My father was very interested in the project, and he always used to say, "You'll see, it'll happen."
In 1945, the Reich surrenders. The Allies divide the country into occupation zones. Sorgel once again sees his chance. Sorgel forges connections to the new people in power. The Allies are looking for new ideas for Germany, and Sorgel has the answer. He manages to present the Atlantropa project to top military officials.
The East-West conflict had broken out. The Cold War had begun. The USA were striving to secure reserves of raw materials worldwide for their economy and for strategic purposes. Africa suddenly became very interesting. Atlantropa was a project which allowed for Europe to open up the African market.
Sorgel now extends his plans to the whole of Africa. In the interior of the continent, The Congo is to be dammed, and a giant artificial sea will be used to generate hydroelectric power. The Chad region is to be flooded, and a third lake will be created further south. According to Sorgel, the water masses will improve the climate and make Africa's development easier. America and the UN show interest. The US sees Atlantropa as a chance to make access to African resources easier, from which they will benefit in the long run. Then another setback for Sorgel. Despite wide approval, no concrete support materializes. Sorgel attempts to rekindle his popularity. He tries new ways of attracting attention. Since the end of the war, what had been the SS training center at Zundhofen had been used by the Allies as a garrison. Sorgel now plans to turn the castle into an Atlantropa University. The U.S. commander supports Sorgel at first, but the ambitious plan is never realized. Sorgel still refuses to admit failure and stays true to his plans. Atlantropa is his life, and again, he finds support. John Knittel is one of the most widely read authors of his time. His novel, Via Mala, enjoys worldwide success and is filmed several times.
There is a letter from my father to Sorgel. He says there, it is just the right moment, as the main character in my book is an engineer, Amadeus, and I can imagine him to be an enthusiastic Atlantropian. It's just landed in my lap at just the right moment.
He really made some of the best propaganda for the project. He integrated a chapter about Atlantropa into his novel, Power of Cell, which really served as an advertisement. The novel sold extremely well, especially after the Second World War. So Knittel really became the best advertising medium for the project.
Das Mittelmeer ist ein Wasserspiegel, der fortwährend verdunstet. Hätte das Mittelmeer keine Zuflüsse, wären sie künstlich gesperrt, so würde sich sein Wasserspiegel durch einfache Verdunstung jährlich um 1,65 Meter senken. Auf dieser Tatsache beruht das Projekt Atlantropa. Was das Mittelmeer verdunstet, erhält es automatisch wieder über die Straße von Gibraltar, wo 88.000 Kubikmeter Wasser in der Sekunde vom Atlantik ins Mittelmeer fließen. Gleichzeitig wären die technischen Voraussetzungen geschaffen, um ungeheure Wasserkräfte für elektrische Energien freizumachen.
John Knittel also brings financial support. Amongst other things, he enables Sorgel to produce an elaborate film advertising the project.
The Dam of Gibraltar is under construction. Millions of square miles of cornland would emerge from the sea. Simultaneously, technical suppositions could be provided to produce immense water power for electric energy.
The results of what an intervention in natural water systems can do are demonstrated by the Aral Sea. The waters flowing into it have been redirected to the cotton fields of Central Asia for decades. Once the fourth largest sea on Earth, it has shrunk by 2/3. All that remains is a barren salt desert.
Herman Sorgel, he had a vision. He does this. He did not have enough natural science to know what are the consequences. The biggest consequence is it will be very difficult to maintain the salinity of the Mediterranean more or less constant. And the consequence is it gets more and more salty until all the organisms died. I think if we do make the project realistic, like what the Chinese are building this big dam on the Yangtze River, then it is necessary to have scientists to come in to say what it's going to do with the environment. But unfortunately, many of those visionaries, they don't think about it. And what is going to happen with this Yangtze Dam is going to be a catastrophe for the East China Sea. But the politicians, all they want is to, their grandiose dreams, and then they don't care about it. So we scientists actually are holding back to say, don't try to do too many good things, because while you try to do good things, you might have bad consequences.
The Oosterschelde barrier in Holland is an example of a successful intervention in nature. A 4-mile-long barrier system protects 435 miles of coast. Only when there is a danger of storms are the 62 steel shutters closed. Otherwise, the coast stays open to the sea. The ecosystem remains unaltered, an idea which played no role in Sorgel's vision of the world.
Building a dam has another consequence. The ocean needs the warm water from Mediterranean Sea. And if this warm water doesn't go to the Atlantic, you might change the heat budget, and you might have an ice age.
Closing off the Mediterranean would affect the flow of water in the Atlantic and also the course of the Gulf Stream. The result would be a catastrophe for Europe's climate.
It is always a challenge for an engineer to work on new and also large projects. It is certainly tempting to be part of something like that. On the other hand, I must say that I am very cautious. I think that influencing the ecosystem in such a considerable way should be avoided. It would be very difficult to calculate the consequences.
The reconstruction of Germany is underway. People are more concerned with jobs and ways to move forward, and less about politics and ideology. But the Atlantropa Institute is making progress. There are offices in many German towns, with several hundred members. Sorgel has moved back to Munich.
The time after the Second World War was a good environment for Sorgel to bring his ideas into play. Many people had suggestions of how to generally avoid wars. Large technocratic projects were being discussed again. On the other hand, the age of visions seemed to be over. Nobody wanted to become involved in huge plans for the future. People were focused on coping with getting everyday life back on track. So nobody was thinking on the scale that Sorgel had done, and still did.
The world reacts to the use of the atom bomb with horror, but soon there is hope that the enormous potential of this new energy source could be put to good civil use.
All of the hopes and dreams which have been focused on the Atlantropa project are now redirected towards and absorbed by atomic energy.
Deutschlands erster Atomreaktor entsteht in der Nähe von München. Im Auftrage des Bayerischen Staates baut ihn die Technische Hochschule München mit einem Baukostenaufwand von rund 4,5 Millionen. Dieser Reaktor wird ausschließlich friedlichen Forschungs- und Lehrzwecken dienen.
In light of atomic power, the Atlantropa project no longer seems economically modern. But Sorgel continues to cling to his life's work. One evening in December 1952, Sorgel, as he often does, makes his way to a lecture. The driver flees the accident scene. The accident in the Prinzregentenstrasse in Munich is never resolved. Sorgel is badly injured and brought to a Munich hospital.
My father had heard about his accident and asked us to see how he was. We visited him at the Nymphenburg Hospital and took him greetings from my father. We stayed there a long time. We might have even visited twice, I don't remember. His mind was still very fit, but he said that he felt very tired. Then he despairingly said that he had lived for nothing. It struck us as very sad. It was depressing. The next day, he died.
The man who wanted to create Atlantropa dies on December 25th, 1952, at age 67.
Herman Sorgel war eine autokratische Figur.
Herman Sorgel was an autocratic figure. He never managed to attract his equals to his ideas. As soon as he was no longer available due to his accidental death, everything collapsed.
The Atlantropa Institute carries on for some years, but Herman Sorgel's charm and zeal are dearly missed. At the end of the 50s, the society is disbanded.
Vision means to say you're looking at very far distant. So maybe 1,000 years from now, it will be a very, very workable idea. Everything he wanted, the hydroelectricity, the more land, and the beautiful environment, it's all possible. Looking with today's eyes, I say, we're not talking about 21st century. We're talking about 500,000 years from now. By that time, we know what are the bad effects. We have the technology to avoid it. So therefore, I still think it's a vision we can think about it. It's something it says impossible.
The devastating firepower of the modern tank